Tier 1 enterprise storage had been the purview of specialized proprietary arrays, expensive to purchase, deploy, administrate, maintain, and upgrade. In the modern software-driven data center, Datera provides enterprise storage features and performance that rivals all-flash arrays in a software that runs on industry-standard servers. Chief Product Officer at Datera, VNR, joins us to provide technical insight into the storage performance, automation, and operational agility that can be achieved in a private and hybrid cloud. VNR is joined by Head of Systems Engineering at Datera, Bill Borsari, who will give a live demo of the Datera Data Services Platform in action. Welcome, VNR and Bill.
Thank you, Ruby.
So, VNR, did your parents give you that name?
No, my parents don't know. Everyone calls me VNR. My actual full name is Valiveti Narasimha Rao. Since school, I created the login ID with VNR, and that ended up being what people started using. So today we are here to, we want to talk about the general requirements that we see in SDDC as a private data center and how Datera actually helps towards that. So we go through the requirements and see how Datera is part of it.
Thank you, VNR. So let me start by talking about what Datera is. Datera is a tier 1 software-defined storage product for your cloud. We think about what the requirements are, and we're really trying to drive toward a predictable, low latency performance response. We're looking for a large data availability. We want to make sure that we can bring on board new technologies as quickly and rapidly as possible to meet the demands that are in the ever-changing business landscape. Part of our secret sauce is the ability to have a data-driven composability, to assemble resources based on the application needs in near real time. We can also deliver self-healing, really help with that operational and automation side of the business through our intelligence in our product. And our customers are finding that they can get a 70% lower CapEx and OpEx when they adopt our technology.
Sorry, yeah. And Bill, you talk mostly to a lot of customers, and sometimes I join you and we talk about it. So what we thought is, talk about the enterprise requirements from an SDDC perspective as they started looking at their, setting up the software-defined data center, what the requirements are. I think the first and the foremost looks like is the, the velocity at which they can deploy, provision the storage, right?
Absolutely.
They look at it and say, how, can I do it myself, right? And can I do it at a speed that I would like to? That's from a developer perspective, right? We all want that. Right. The second thing is from an operational perspective, right? How flexible it is, right? Can I roll it out, a new technology that comes in, right? How fast can I roll it out? And then the third, most important that I felt is the policy, the automation part.
Absolutely.
Right? And we hear this day in, day out, right? If I set the policy and if I'm not, watching it, and if this event happens, or how am I making sure that it's actually the policy is getting restrictive to certain things that I set it up.
Well,
right?
I think there's another important aspect about this is a lot of times when I talk to our customers and prospects, it's about what is cloud. And it's a very expansive topic. From our perspective, it really boils down to self-service. How do you deliver a self-service infrastructure? And you talk about the technologies like policies, those types of technologies help enable a storage infrastructure to become self-service. Traditional enterprises and traditional infrastructure was based upon rigid controls, ticket-based system, a long lead time to do things, and we're just seeing businesses have to move away from that.
Yeah, and I think the other part, in addition to the automation that comes in, is the performance, right? Certainly, performance is one that folks want to say that, hey, for a given performance, right, I know that if I'm using this kind of storage or if I'm using this kind of infrastructure, I get a certain performance, and they are ready to pay for a dollar for that type of storage, right? And so that's ability to define what consistent performance that they get for a dollar value, right? Yeah, so those are, I think, some of the requirements that we see from an enterprise perspective.
Yeah, just to dovetail on the performance question, there's a lot of products on the market in the storage space, and many of them are starting to claim sub 200 microsecond, sub 100 microsecond latency, which we can achieve as well. But ultimately, these organizations that are adopting it, they have those requirements, but those are the smallest requirements today. What they're after is something that can meet the business needs, millisecond level response time. So performance also has a lot of connotations. We'll talk about that as we talk about the product a bit more.
Okay, and then I think the big one that we talk about, and I think you touched on it, is cloud, and how folks want to do it, whether it's a developer trying to provision the storage, or it's the IT operations trying to get the infrastructure set up and adopt the new technology. I think the flexibility comes into picture, right? How flexible we are, how from an SDDC perspective, right? If I am looking at setting up an SDDC environment, will I be logged into a single vendor, right? Will I look at it, do I have a dual vendor strategy, or do I have multi-vendor strategy, right? How is that going to? So that's another requirement that we hear often from customers. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because as a technology vendor, there's a certain desire to want to make sure that customers continue to buy your product. From a customer perspective, we hear all the time that they want to make sure that they have multiple options. One of the interesting facets about our technology is that we can, as much as we can, support both worlds, where the Wave Designer technology, it's so flexible, you can adopt different vendors' server within the infrastructure to really open that up. And we'll talk more about this.
Okay. Right. Into the next one, as we looked at the, I think the 5 things that we talked about is the flexibility for the end user, the IT operations flexibility, the automation part, right? The performance, and then in large, not having a vendor lock-in, right? So these are the 5, requirements that I would say most essential that we hear often.
Yeah, I mean, automation is huge right now. There's so many different facets of that.
Yeah, that's the tip of the spear. Yeah.
It is.
Okay. So I just want to go to the next slide and look at the, some of the things that we actually see, right? And we hear this from, the analysts as well. The private data centers are here, right? We see close to, 60% of the workloads being actually deployed in the private data centers, right? And we see 85 or close to 85% of it are repatriating from, the cloud. The primary thing for folks that are coming into the private data centers are the security, the performance, and the cost, right? These are the top three that comes up. Another analyst that we saw is, more than 50% of the customers today actually use SDS, right? And then, 70+% are committed to continuing to use the software defined, right? So I think these are some of the things that we see in the industry as we are looking at the SDDC and the software defined storage. Some of the IT changes, I mean, we talked about the requirements, right? But we also, as we see the changes that are happening, it's the changes in terms of the people, in terms of the process, right? In terms of the economics, and in terms of the architecture, right? People, like we talked about, having the ability to provision, the flexibility that they would like to have, right? The process part, how is my operating model going to be? Whether I'm going to go with a CapEx or a OpEx, right? Everybody is moving away from having a CapEx model to an OpEx model, right? The same thing with economics, right? How much am I going to pay? Am I going to start with what I want right now, and then as I use it, I'll pay more, right? So these are some of the things that are happening. From an architecture point of view, we see scale out, right? And the ability to, get in new technology as they come in, right? I don't have to wait for 2 years or 3 years for me to actually roll out the new architecture.
Absolutely.
So these are some of the SDDC changes that we are seeing within the industry. Any other things that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, the number that Mark was talking about with 55% of organizations having an SDS in operations today, One of the driving factors is moving from traditional architectures, which are fantastic,
Yeah.
to a server-based architecture.
Yeah.
And there's operational reasons to do it, there's cost reasons to do it, but that's, I think, driving a lot of it is the data center operators, administrators, and organizations are looking at their large numbers of servers and saying, why can't I buy a server to do this? And so we are seeing the adoption of SDS, but then you start getting into how are you going to manage scale? You talked about flexibility.
Yeah.
Flexibility is fantastic. In traditional enterprises, flexibility was bad because things would break.
Yeah.
And that's where you need to have a very strong architecture and a strong product to provide the rails. Talk about self-service.
Yep.
I can request different resources up to a certain point. Well, who's going to enforce that? Right, so we've seen technology, OpenStack, and now the rise of containerization and VMware. You know, we can provide that as our technology stack too, and put those guide rails and guardrails on.
Yep. Perfect. Okay.
So, you know, as we're talking about the main reasons why we're seeing these enterprises make this transition, and as we talk about all these buzzwords, SDDC, SDS, composability, all the different buzzwords, really it boils down to tangible business results. How do these organizations make a difference to their end users or customers or internal customers? And as part of the work that ESG did is they actually polled the folks to find out what do you care about. Number one is increased performance with SDS. What are we talking about? One of the major shifts in the storage industry about 10 years ago was the rise of flash. The flash media became very inexpensive. Today, we're in a very different world. Now we're looking at new protocols. We're looking at flash now having NAND flash, which is the traditional SSD everyone talks about. Intel has their wonderful 3D XPoint technologies. So even the term flash is no longer useful. So how do you onboard that? How do you bring that into your data center? This is a major reason why people are looking to adopt the SDDC, because they can get that rapid technology adoption. It's so key. Then we talk about the simplification and the hybrid cloud environments. And I don't want to knock on any of the previous products, but when you're building anything, you have to have a design.
Yep.
And you have to make trade-offs. You have to make decisions about what you're going to do, what you're not going to do. In the traditional hardware products, they were born in a different universe where it was a ticketed model. They did use technologies like Fiber Channel. They were designed to bring all the I/O back to a really heavily protected location, and those models are all gone. In this new age, when businesses are trying to get more agile and they're trying to simplify, they can't have technology that doesn't fit their model. One of our customers is looking at doing expansion next year. They bought traditional storage products, IP-based, but in order to plug that IP-based storage product, dual head architecture, into their network environment, they had to do patch runs to core, and it was very painful from the modernization perspective of their network. So looking at our technology, because we can fit in very nicely with that. Then you start talking about that flexibility, the choice. I love competition. I love seeing competition everywhere. To have multiple vendors, to have, even in the media side, Intel has their technologies, others will have theirs. It's just an amazing benefit that the customers get to gain. And you get that greater agility, the ability to listen to your business, to be able to respond to the business as timely as possible. That's a major reason why customers are going to external clouds. They want that capability in-house. They want every workload to have that same kind of quality. And then, of course, the reduction in operating expenditure. One of the organizations we're talking to recently had a massive cut in their operational staff. The way that the management wanted them to make change was to make the change for them and then have the operational staff adjust. That's a harsh way of doing things, but it gets to that same point. That organization had to rethink IT top to bottom. How am I going to live in my new reality? So different organizations are going to approach that differently, but the ability in moving to SDS, going to servers, using server deployment technology versus traditional storage deployment technologies, Pixie and those sorts of things, really help in the operational side.
Yep.
So I'm going to dive in and talk a bit more about the Datera platform itself. You know, we talk about the software platform allows automation of data at scale. Fundamental to that is the ability to move and migrate data throughout the platform. And we talk about this being application-driven and policy-driven, the ability really to free data from a particular physical location. And it's not that this technology is new. That's not the challenge. There's a number of different ways you can solve this. What we bring, what our technology does uniquely, is the way we've implemented our algorithms, the way our nodes connect to each other, we have complete freedom in where we place that data. Super powerful architecture that unlocks our ability to balance for capacity, to do non-disruptive upgrades, to do bringing in brand new tiers of storage without any impact of previous. It's all of these capabilities are driven by this new technology we've created around what we call target placement. And the enterprise performance piece is so critical. We have been maniacal at driving latency out of our stack and being able to deliver our customers sub 200 microsecond latencies. Most of our customers don't need that. But when they do, they know that our product can support them for that and deliver it, which means that we can have more workloads on our technology so they have to make less churn choosing vendors. It's so very powerful. And then we talk about continuous technology adoption. The idea of being able to say, Intel's released a new media type. I can plug that into a HPE server. Samsung has released a new media type. I have a new generation from my vendor of an HP. How do I plug that in? How do I make all this work? To give a counterpoint, right?
Yeah.
We've done storage a long time. We worked at Veritas together 20 years ago. The old way of doing things was you would buy a disk. It had a label from a vendor. If you needed more of them, you'd go back to the vendor and you'd buy a disk with that label.
Yeah.
You remember those days, right?
Yes, I do.
So we can smash that model by saying, wait a minute, all the nodes are independent from each other. I bring in a new node. I plug it into the infrastructure. I tell it which server, which cluster to join. It joins that automatically. And you go on. You control everything via policy. And we'll show that in the demonstration. And the other critical part about this is the data center and operating at scale, how the data centers are changing. What we've seen is that the organizations that are moving toward this more cloud model, they've recognized the advantages of building larger infrastructure, more scale. Because I get to, it becomes a game of percentage. Yeah. If you're building a cloud, you need a little over percentage so that you can take that growth and that expansion. And so with our technology, one of our customers is actually putting a single Datera node per rack across the hundreds of racks they have in their data center and connecting us into their actual network fabric. We talk about the SDDC Symposium and bringing these companies together, and something that Guy said earlier about companies don't want components, they want solutions.
Outcomes.
And outcomes, exactly. And this is where us working within the standards, within the industry, and partnering with companies like Mellanox and Cumulus allow us to integrate into their routing fabrics using the BGP technology so that really we can realize a real business value for the customer so that he doesn't have to be constrained by how long a wire is between connecting a data storage shelf to a data storage head.
Yeah.
We can destroy all of that. Yeah. And then the last one, maybe you want to talk about the predictive operations that we have.
No, I think I want to tie off one that you said
Sure.
with the predictive operations part, and this is like goes into it, right? One of the things that we keep talking about is, understanding your environment, how you're using it, and what you're using it for. And you talked about the flash, you talked about the adoption of it. Just today, as we, getting ready for it, I was talking to one of the customers, or at least we, he reached out and said, you know what, I'm looking at your insights or the analytics that we provide, and I see this is what is happening. A, I'm running out of capacity. B, I feel like, I need a lot more performance, and I want to go for a different type of nodes, right? So the thing, all of the requirements that we talked about, which is having that visibility, having the transparency, right? Mm-hmm. What is happening, how, what application, what workload, and how it's behaving, right? And ability to say, I am going to actually run out of capacity based on some prediction of how much I'm writing, per day, per workload, right? Based on that, I can do some prediction and say, within 30 days or within 15 days, I'm actually going to be at a near capacity, mm-hmm. right? And what am I doing to actually getting ready for it, right? So this thing is, I had a nodes that I had previously at a lower capacity nodes, right? I want to actually go get a higher capacity node. So sure, the architecture allows it. So the fact that people think about what they want to do as their infrastructure, as their business mm-hmm. kind of starts growing, then they can start thinking about how am I going to actually scale my infrastructure?
Right.
How am I going to have my infrastructure to support my business, right? That's where the outcomes come in, right? The intent is to support the growing business. Right?
Yeah, and I want to build off of that. You mentioned the term node, right? This is very important to our architecture. As we thought about modernizing storage and being able to bring this technology into the data center, we thought about what are the building blocks going to be? And instead of building a system based on individual drives, which we can get into the technology side, has a lot of downsides, we decided to think about nodes themselves. We keep using this term, node. What is that? We're talking about a server from your favorite vendor that has media. In our model, in our world, we think of those servers having consistent media type.
Yeah.
So we might call a node NVMe flash. So our expectation is that the media that's storing and reading and writing the customer data is all NVMe flash. There'll be other stuff for boot and whatnot. But we can also support different node types. A hybrid node and for Datera would be an amount of flash and amount of disk.
That's right.
But we can bring new things in, like there's a lot of talk persistent memory, the Intel Optane.
Yeah.
So we would think of a node that had Intel Optane as an Optane node or whatever. The power of our technology and what makes it so powerful is the fact that because we're policy driven, these very complex technology aspects boil down into labels.
Yeah.
So as new technology comes into our system, you can literally call it an NVMe flash node if you want to. Maybe you don't want to call it that because you don't want the people using the system to know that's what it is. But
everybody wants that.
Everybody wants the fastest, right?
Yeah,
but it's not about that. It's about being flexible and self-service.
Yeah.
So, I just wanted to make sure we use these terms all the time, and we do this, day in, day out. But I just want to make sure everyone understands that from our technology perspective, it's about the Datera software on a server. The server has a personality based on what the customer chose to purchase to go inside.
That's right.
And then we federate those, put them in a cluster, and then you provision a volume based on a policy, and our system composes a response and gives the data.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. So, do you want to talk about the old rules?
Yeah, I think the part is, as we start talking about SDDC and as we talk about SDS, what Datera does, what we thought is, compare and contrast, right? To look at what the old ways of doing it, how we would do it. If I am trying to buy a storage for my business, right? I look at and say, okay, where am my business going to be 3 years from now or 5 years from now? And then plan for it and say, okay, I'm going to go at a certain, I will do the sizing.
Right.
And we used to go and do the sizers and then come up and say, yeah, I'm going to grow this much and then plan for it, right? Once I plan for it, I know that that's what I'm locked in, right? I go through the operations part, the deploying part, and then the scaling. The scaling is, if I have a space that I bought a low end of that, the array, for example, and I kind of expand that array in place, right? But now the question comes in 3 years or 5 years down the line, what are you going to do, right? That's where you have to think about, okay, how am I going to get another, other array that is, I may have bought a spinning disk hybrid array. Now I'm going to go buy an all-flash array
and choose a new vendor.
Or a new vendor, right? And then start thinking about how am I going to do a forklift upgrade of our biggest one, from Veritas days, which is the migration, right? How are you going to migrate? How am I going to migrate the data that I have on this one to the other one? These are all the things that goes through in a typical planning, refreshing of the storage or the infrastructure, right, for the business. Now, what happens if the business exponentially grew in the 3 years, right? Either you're getting another set of those things, or you're thinking that, okay, this is not going to scale, I have to go something else, right? With the SDS, with the Datera, I think one of the things is that the thing that we stressed on, which is the automation, the transparency, the flexibility, you don't have to worry about what it would be next year or 2 years from now. You start with what is needed at the moment, right? Or what you think you need. And you can always add more to it, or you can grow as your business grows.
Or take away.
Right? You can decommission the nodes. And you talked about the node concept of what type of node do you want to add, right?
Right.
Like I gave an example earlier, the customer says, okay, for this particular application, I wanted it a different, the latency profile,
Right.
right? If I need a different latency profile, maybe the flash or the NVMe or the SATA or SAS flash, can I get a node with that? Or a Optane or a ZSSD.
And this is where that analytics, we talk about the
Yeah,
predictive
exactly.
operations, is so incredibly important.
That's
because there's something easy about having a limited set of choices.
Yep.
And one of the powers when you have a lot of choices is
Yeah.
what choice do I make? I don't know if you've ever asked your significant other, what do you want to do for dinner? Usually takes a while because there is so much choice in terms of where to eat.
Yeah.
This is where the predictive operations really help out. And we can, you mentioned the latency.
Yeah.
With our tools, we can tell customers, if you want to see 90% responses under 1 millisecond, you need this much.
Yeah.
And so we can help guide that decision. So it's not looking at 25 different restaurants, it's looking at the 3 with the best reviews
That's
and
right.
how to move forward.
Yeah. So I think that's what the part that I wanted to compare and contrast is, there is a certain planning, there is a certain what if I am wrong kind of thing.
Right.
That all of that goes away with the SDS or what Datera is trying to do.
Absolutely.
Because with the Datera, you can start with what you know and then grow as you need it. And I just want to reiterate that part of it, which is we will never go and tell a customer, sorry, you could have planned better, right? Because that's not possible, right? Yes, there is always a case that your business may grow and you may actually need a different profile completely, right? So that's a new way of thinking about SDS or when you're deploying a SDDC infrastructure.
Absolutely. So as we talk about the technology, we've talked about different nodes, talked about automation, policy, just to provide more focus on those concepts. Really, what policy is about, and I think the best example is AWS. It's very common, so everyone kind of understands it. When you request a virtual machine, and I remember the days of AWS when it was 3 choices, and now it was like 40. But when you request a system, maybe you ask for an M3. Well, what is that? At the end of the day, you get a login prompt. You can look at the node and ask it questions like, what kind of CPU are you telling me you have? What kind of network are you telling me you have? But you don't know, because all those things can be tricked. And so what you're really doing is you're provisioning a label. It's a policy. The M3, which we consider to be a sort of a physical, like a VM, is actually a policy of SLAs.
Yeah.
You expect this many gigahertz and so forth. And we look on the storage side of the house, the EBS technology, and IO1. I mean, it's fantastic. What does it mean? It means literally nothing. It means what they tell you it means.
It's a label.
Versus like I'm looking at I've got a Samsung 1725B. Like that has parameters. It's a thing. But now you start moving into this new world. You want to move into policy-driven infrastructure. And really that's what the Datera system is all about. And the way that we operate is the administrators in most organizations get to sit down with the architects and define what that policy set's going to look like. As an organization, you understand your business requirements and say, we're going to have 20 policies. We're going to have 2 policies. I'm going to copy Amazon. Your choice. I'm not going to enforce that. Those policies, as you think about them, are collections of settings. If we look at a traditional array product, maybe it says you want a volume, you want to have this RAID type, you want to have this kind of performance controls, you want to have this kind of snapshot controls, all those aspects of it. You have to answer those questions. You answer them in our system as well, but you answer them on a policy basis as opposed to answering them for a hardware set. Talking about the old versus new. Specifically, we can do things like gold storage. What is that? It's what I told you it was. And then our job as a technology is to be able to meet that and to warn and notify if we can't. The architect's job is to make sure that those policies are aligned. The administrator's job is to make sure that the policies are being met, that the physical infrastructure can deliver it, all that kind of capability. But the key is really getting to that policy-based capability. Then we talk about the automation. The technology is very advanced in terms of how it thinks about the way these different policies interact. One of the techniques we've implemented we call the placement mode of best effort, where when I've requested something you don't quite have, what do you do? And there's a lot of machinery to make sure we can still respond, because that's one of the aspects of being self-service. someone is going to overrun the requirement, someone's going to overrun your infrastructure. You don't want to say no when you can say yes.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of technology around there to do that. And then again, the administrators get to manage the environment, be able to set those policies and control those policies. And that's what we're going to talk about when we do the demonstration right now. Wrong button. So I'm going to show the Datera user interface here. What are we looking at? This is a Firefox browser. I'll switch to Chrome in a second, and I'll explain why. We're looking at a tenant view of the Datera system. We talk about these different, the flexibility and the automation, all these aspects that we see in the modern data center. One of the keys of this is constituency, like the developer versus the orchestration engine versus the administrator.
Yep.
So this is a developer view, if you will, or orchestration engine view, specifically around Kubernetes. I've got performance running in the top here. We have historical graphs. We can zoom out and zoom in on these. We talk about, we do things a bit differently. We talk about application instances because we've recognized through our experience that an application typically is a collection of volumes. Not always, but when you think about the more traditional applications like an Oracle, right? You want to be able to take a consistent snapshot across that whole infrastructure. Our system can manage that. And what ends up happening is these application instances are broken down into what we call storage instances, the ability to present storage. Our platform today supports iSCSI and object, and in the future we're going to add additional protocols into the same infrastructure. So as customers have adopted Datera, one day they'll install a build and they'll get a new maybe file service. Yeah. And all of the controls and all of the capability that we currently deliver will be there for that type of protocol. So then we get into the volumes themselves, definitions around what kind of IOPS and so forth for the different volumes. Just a quick tour, a high level of the system. And the system is also built against infrastructure, nodes. In our particular demonstration we have today, we actually have 10 nodes. From an Intel Optane all the way down to what we would consider hybrid. We also have in this infrastructure nodes from Supermicro and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise working together seamlessly. You can't even tell from the screenshot here which is which because we want to abstract that type of detail as far out as we can. So we keep talking about policy, policy, policy. When we look at the capabilities, I'm going to jump over to this portion of our technology we call templates. You can see here that there's a set of labels. These are the labels of policies that are available to this particular user. And so I can click in and say, what is a gold? Well, a gold is a certain amount of data protection, a certain amount of IOPS. There's no snapshots configured for this one. But it's basically all the questions that you had to answer in the past for delivering storage wrapped up under a single label. This is a Kubernetes infrastructure. It integrates in through the CSI plugin mechanism. We have a storage class that aligns based on using the shared labels so that I can provision gold, silver, bronze, platinum from my Kubernetes infrastructure and start running I/O. What we've done here is provisioned 11 volumes, 10 are active currently, from that Kubernetes environment. So this is the view of a tenant. So now I'm going to switch over and show the view of the system. So our tenant was doing about 50,000 IOPS. The system itself is doing about 100,000 IOPS. Here you can see we've got a lot more instances, more servers connected, same number of nodes being presented. The system view gives administrators significantly more control over what's happening. One of the things that I couldn't do here, you'll notice, is there's no edit button in the corner, if you can see the mouse. As I jump back over and if I navigate to the template view, first thing you'll notice there's a lot more templates because we segregate them by tenants as well. But as the administrator, I can actually make changes to this. So I can hit the edit button here. And what we're going to do is we're going to change from 5,000 IOPS to 1,000 IOPS.
So you're actually setting a kind of a QoS, a limit to the tenant.
Absolutely. So on a per volume basis, these volumes are bound to that label.
Yep.
And that policy set.
Yep.
And previously the policy set said 5,000 IOPS.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is say, let's reduce the amount of IOPS that the volumes using that policy get by making this change. So I'm going to hit the save button here. And now we can watch the dashboard of our tenant and watch the IOPS reduce down as they go from 50,000 to 10,000. There are 10 volumes. Every volume had 1,000 IOPS. Just like that, we've reclassed the system. The end user had no impact. The administrator touched one location, and that policy ripples through the system.
Yeah.
Of course, we have the ability to snowflake individual instances where I can say this one volume needs to be a little bit lower and all the others stay the same. We can do that with our technology. But moving to that policy-based control is what's so very powerful about the system.
Yeah. Look at that. Now it's 10K IOPS across.
10K IOPS, absolutely. Of course, there's a relationship between IOPS and latency.
Of course,
because
yes.
of the way we throttling the workloads. So the next thing I want to talk about is how easy it is to bring a new node into the system. So we talk about this node concept. You'd call your vendor, ship me a node. We have qualified nodes, bill of materials, because we do want to provide guidance. There's a saying I like to use with customers and prospects. Any server could be a storage server, but not every server is a good storage server. And fundamentally, the way you evaluate server technology is fundamentally different than the way you evaluate storage technology.
Yep.
Dollar per gig versus gigahertz. And so we work with our vendors, we have qualified lists, we spend a lot of time in our engineering to make sure they work well, but the process to bring a new node online is very, very, very simple. So the idea is you take it out of the box, it either comes with the OS image or not, you load the OS image, and you're greeted by this simple web page. I'm going to hit the Join Existing button. I'm going to hit the name of my demo system. And of course, it's a live demo, so we'll see if it works. I give it the IP address, who I need to talk to. What's a good one? I'll do 5. And then I give it a password. And let's see if this works. So this is where we start talking about that integration with the other technologies. The way this particular system is set up, it's using our layer 3 integration. So what's happening is as we create resources, move them around within our storage infrastructure, we're actually propagating those changes into the layer 3 infrastructure running on the switch through BGP. So this does take a couple of minutes. But what will end up happening is we're going to see in the node list here, a new node is coming into the system. Now we have a control plane. Control plane has to figure out what the node is. Then it instructs that node to build the data plane. All these things happen in an automated way. The administrator doesn't need to worry about the various details about which disks and how they plug together and how to optimize for the media type.
Yep.
Our system is smart enough to treat hard drives and SSDs differently.
Yep.
And we do all of that work, so the administrators don't have to do it. So that concludes the demonstration.
Yeah, I think the part that I want to pick up what you said, right? So like you talked about creating the labels, right? You can create whatever labels you want to. And then once you create those labels and set the policies, you can assign those to the workloads that you have. In a traditional environment, it used to be before SDDC or SDS, is you go and say, okay, I'm going to run Oracle, or we're going to run certain business critical tier 1 workload, right? And here is the infrastructure for that particular workload,
right?
And then you go into a different workload, NoSQL kind of databases or others, and then say, here is the infrastructure or a storage for that particular workload. What we are saying is we have a single system, irrespective of the underlying node types or the media. You can create whatever media that you want to add to that system, and then you create the policies.
Right.
And the policies will define these set of nodes, or let's say low latency nodes. You categorize them as platinum, and then say, this workload I categorize as a platinum workload that goes into this set of platinum nodes, right? So what happened now is you went away from being a silo kind of a workload defined infrastructure to a single infrastructure that you can define the same things by having a policies.
Right.
Right? And and the best part, like you said, is if there is a new technology that comes in tomorrow, and you want to define that as Platinum 2 or something else, right? It's a label that you're putting to a group of nodes that you have, right? And then allows you to say that this workload that I need a, let's say, 150 microsecond latency or a 200 microsecond latency, this application workload is only going to have allocations or their placements of the data that's getting written is only on these Platinum nodes or Platinum 2 nodes, right? So that's the concept that from a, how do you differentiate between the old model of silo-based infrastructure deployment to a new way of, here is a platform that allows you to set policies based on the workloads that you're trying to deploy.
And the policies are dynamic.
Policies are dynamic,
Absolutely.
and underneath, either you're decommissioning the technology because that is obsolete or it does not meet your purpose of what your application needs, and then you reel in another set of nodes with a low latency or the thing that helps the workload, the business.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. We go into the next one. So how the deployment models, right? If you go into the deployment models is, Datera, like you talked about nodes. Minimum is a 3-node configurations that we have.
Right.
And it gets deployed in it scales across nodes. So you can add as many nodes as you need.
So just to be fair, right? We're talking about a storage node.
Yeah.
And we can go down as low as 10 terabytes of capacity up to 100 terabytes of flash or hybrid.
Per node.
Per node. So there's a lot of variation in terms of what this means.
Yeah, at the node, it's a good point, because just because you have the number of slots or it depends on what capacity that you want to start off with. Right. You may start off with like you said, 5 or 6 terabyte 1U boxes, or you can start off with a 2U, which goes all the way up to 150 terabyte. Right. Again, it depends on the density of the drives that you select and all of that.
150 this year, could be 300 next year. We'll see what the drive is released.
Exactly. Yeah. So gets deployed across nodes, right? And gets deployed across a rack. Within a rack, if there is a existing infrastructure, you can actually put it within that rack, across aisles, right? Or within the aisle, you have multiple racks. And as you know, as we talk to the customers, they say is, I don't want to put all of the storage on one rack, because from a failure domain perspective, I actually want to kind of isolate them across racks. Right?
Absolutely.
And we have seen customers saying that, or some of the ones that we are now working on is basically saying, I want to be able to withstand 2 rack failures. Right. So how they want to spread it across the aisle, right? Across the racks, right? And then and the next thing is across the data centers, right? Whether it's a stretch cluster that you set it up, or actually have a failure domain. If you have a very good latency, they set it up such a way that you can actually work across the data center, metro cluster, a campus cluster, or a stretch cluster kind of thing, right? The other part is, with the features that we have, the other things that I actually look at all of this is, whether you're doing a snapshots, whether you're doing a, taking the snapshot, taking it to the an object store kind of thing. Like you said, we support block and object. We can actually have an object on the other side, on the other data center, and actually transfer the, as a snapshots, you can daily have a snapshot on the DR side, right, the secondary side, right? So gives the flexibility of whether I'm keeping it within the same rack, across racks, or across data centers, but you have that flexibility and you'll grow with the business, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
So I wanted to finish up the talk today and talk about a partnership that we've done with HPE and Mellanox to build what we call a cloud kit. As customers are beginning this journey, and we see organizations moving away from fiber channel to IP-based networking for block storage. Customers have already embraced IP block storage and looking to get policy-based automation. We see customers adopting new workloads like Kubernetes. and looking to find a new technology that can work for Kubernetes and also for other types of applications and operators, we built this cloud kit, tested, documented with our partners at HPE. It's a single SKU. You order it, it shows up, all the cables are there, it's ready to rock and roll. And really takes a lot of the choices off the table. It's not that you can't make choices. If you go to a really nice restaurant, they usually tell you what you're going to eat. You go to a cheap restaurant and they have lots of options. It's interesting. So this is like the nice restaurant version of start here. We know this works, we'll tell you the performance, and you can get started with it. And we call it the Cloud Kit. You could take this into production as well and run your infrastructure off it, but really we wanted to simplify this whole process. And so you can go to our website, datera.io/cloudkit, to get more information about it. But really the goal is to try to allow customers to saying, I want to get started. How do I make this easy?
Yep.
This is ultimately the easy button to bring this technology into your infrastructure.
Yeah, I think you hit it right. It's an easy button, right? It helps you both from a server side, from a networking, working with Mellanox, Mellanox, which is part of the Cloud Kit, right? And the Datera software. So it's all together. It's an easy button that will get you the setup up and running very quickly.
Start modernizing your infrastructure.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.